So, good morning. My name is Seth. I'm with According to Seth. Today, I'm joined by director Marcus Stokes to talk about his new film, State of Consciousness. How you doing, Marcus?
I'm doing good, Seth. How are you? It's been
I'm
good to meet you.
good to meet you too. I watched the movie last night and I absolutely loved it. There were so many twists and turns, man. It was great.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. It was a difficult movie to make, as since you've seen it, you've seen there's a few big sequences, but in general, it was kind of a very tough joy to make.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. What were some of your inspirations for this one? Because I like definitely got some like Shutter Island vibes and like a much scarier Groundhog's Day.
Yeah. I mean, I come from a world of both architecture, directing, and also visual effects. I worked on some of the Matrix films. I worked on some of the Star Wars films. So I think I've, just by the nature of what I've been through, I kind of carry that with me throughout some of my films.
hmm
And there's definitely some scenes in the movie that are a little bit Matrix inspired. But yeah, I mean, my inspiration is, I work off of I like to watch a lot of stuff, probably a lot of the same things that you like. I'm a big Nolan fan.
Yep.
Um, and this sort of psychological thriller or sci-fi or, really heavy drama is kind of my wheelhouse. So when I read the script, I was very interested in it. And we made a lot of changes on the script to make it a little bit more exciting.
That's awesome. And I guess that'll bring me up to my next question then, because there were a lot of like really cool twists and you think it's one thing and it's not. Did you have any other ideas for other directions that you want to take the story?
No, I think, any story that sort of messes with reality, you kind of end up, you have to kind of keep the spine somewhat solid,
hmm
because otherwise you can just kind of spin off of the narrative thread, so to speak. It's like time travel movies kind of have that problem a lot, right? Where, what are the rules, those types
Yeah,
of things. So I think the idea was to make the sort of framework for the story, uh, the foundation really solid, so that when we went off on all these little sort of narrative tangents, it wasn't a big deal and people kind of knew where they were.
that's awesome. Yeah, I was wondering that because I feel like there was like so many great twists. I was like, where else could he be taking this?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you have a psychological thriller, you always have the foundation of, his perceived reality.
hmm
So a lot of times, you can always go back to that. And it's a narrative technique, and
Yeah.
people use it from time to time. Like I said, I use the example of like time travel stories. There's always like the possibility of going back to the original time that they're at, so everybody can get grounded,
Yep.
right? And I think we use those same sort of techniques in this story, because the main problem is you want to make sure that the audience is always on board, and you don't want them to get ahead of you, but also
hmm
you don't want them to just be confused.
Yeah.
And whenever you're sort of like messing with reality, you run into a problem where people are confused and they don't enjoy the narrative, so we're trying to sort of balance that line.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's very difficult. I saw this was your first feature film, so congrats. Were there any challenges going from like directing television and shorts to a feature film, or was there something that you kind of learned during filming those other projects that helped you with this one?
That's a very good question. I think when you're doing films that aren't, tent poles, so to speak, the biggest constraint is generally the amount of time that you have.
hmm
And so I think that in particular, my experience in doing television, where we're shooting so many pages a day, and the speed, it's kind of a machine, and so doing episodes of television like Walking Dead and 911, where there's all this stress and big set pieces, definitely made it a lot easier for me. I think the biggest challenge was we shot the movie way back in 2020
hmm
in Italy during COVID.
Oh wow.
Right. So the biggest problem, it wasn't during the first wave, it was kind of a little bit later in the year, but there were the health concerns was definitely sort of the overriding issue.
hmm
We shot half the movie in Italy and the other half in Guatemala. And you're talking about international travel and people flying in from all over the place. So just making sure that everybody stayed safe and doing all the COVID protocols, which is also something I was very familiar with by doing television, really
hmm
helped me out. And then I think the other thing that a lot of sort of aspiring filmmakers might be interested in is, I started out doing shorts running around, pay to play, running around Los Angeles, sometimes with permits, sometimes not.
Hmm.
You grab your camcorder, you just kind of figure it out. And I think that, that skill and that experience definitely helps you because there were little events where, we had like a cop car. There's a
Hmm.
scene where a cop comes to check on the family, and the car that we had for some reason was this subcompact thing. And they were putting like the police sticker on. I'm like, that's not a police car. What are you talking about? So, by doing shorts, I'm like, who has a pickup truck?
Yeah.
Anybody have a pick? Okay, bring that pickup truck over here. Put the red and blue lights on top of it. Now you have a cop car, right? So things like that where you can kind of think on your feet, you only get that through kind of trial by fire. And so doing a lot of those short films definitely helped me do that.
Yeah, and I saw some of your past work for TV shows like Arrow, Supergirl, and I loved all of those. So and The Walking Dead. So that's awesome.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel very fortunate to have been, because most of the time people are going out and making these short films so that they could possibly have a career in directing.
Hmm.
And it's not always an easy road. But, I think the tough bit is just to stick around,
Yeah.
right? To stick with it and keep, if this is your passion and you want to make films, I don't really think it matters if you're making a short film with your friends or if you're making, an episode of 911. The most important thing is to tell a good story. And it's really hard for kind of aspiring filmmakers and starting filmmakers starting out. Obviously, it's getting easier and easier as the technology increases. Um, but I guess, I just want people to understand that, I don't come from a filmmaker family.
Hmm.
You have that story where, oh, my grandfather gave me a Bolex such and such when I was 5 years old. And no, I got interested in this coming out of visual effects when I was, well into my career and just decided I want to take a crack at it. So I'm really just trying to, in whatever way I can, just try to keep people inspired and to tell them to keep telling stories, and maybe they'll get the opportunities that some of us are fortunate to get, and I think just if you don't quit you have a chance. If you quit you have no chance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's awesome to hear because I know I'm sure it's very difficult to break into this kind of scene. And people are easier to kind of just give up if the going gets hard. So it's nice to hear that, if you keep pushing, opportunities will come, which is awesome.
Yeah,
And
and the big thing is just be open,
yep.
right? Because I mean, I was presented this script maybe 2 or 3 years before we went into production. And it needed some work, and it was a nice strong script, but it needed a little bit of work. And I honestly wasn't sure if the movie was going to happen, but I was open to it, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times you're like, who's this guy, or is this going to happen, or whatever. I think we just have to be open if we want these opportunities to happen, because if you had told me 10 years ago that I was going to be making my first movie in the southern coast of Italy, I would have told you were crazy, right? And then, a few years passes and there you are, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know you said that you filmed in Italy and a few other places. So, what were some of the challenges? I guess obviously you had COVID, but what were some of the other challenges filming in another country versus filming in like the States?
Well, I think the language barrier, I mean, other than COVID, I think we had some language barrier issues, right? We're shooting in Italy. I don't speak Italian, right? But there's a lot of great talented people all over the world. And that's kind of the most sort of entertaining aspect is there's filmmakers everywhere, there's visual effects artists everywhere, there's costume designers everywhere. So the language of film is somewhat universal, and so the language barrier is surmountable, right? We also had to worry about shooting the second half in Guatemala and getting there, right? So there were some travel issues, and then you're in Guatemala, you got a whole different language, right? Right.
Yeah.
uh, You've got, there's always time constraints. There's always, when you have a movie that doesn't have the largest budget in the world, but you come from a universe where you're working on big budget movies, I didn't want the movie to feel small,
Hmm.
right? So I think the challenge is how do you put big moments in a movie without the largest budget? And I think you just have to pick your punches,
Yep.
right? And you have to be really efficient. I think one of the interesting things is, I kind of keep coming back to this idea of being open, is that there's a scene in the movie where Stephen finally figures out where he's at, and we're in this sort of a hospital setting, and it's kind
Hmm.
of this depressed area where he kind of is trying to escape from this sort of officer type guy who's trying to catch him. And that was like an elementary school auditorium, right? It was like our whole sort of hospital was shot in an Italian elementary school.
Oh wow.
And, at first glance, it may not look like a great place for a hospital, but they had some very interesting architecture,
Yeah.
right? They had this sort of like open courtyard. They had this sort of sunken sort of atrium assembly room. And I think based on my architecture background, I was like, I think I can do something with this. So rather than just going to some office building, that we've seen 100 times, just a guy randomly running down hallways, we had some opportunities to kind of air it out a little bit, get outside, get in the courtyard, get in the auditorium. And I think, it's just trying to find the opportunities within the challenges,
Yeah.
right? You know what I mean? Because typically you're going around looking at, oh, we need a hospital. We start going to hospitals. And you just have to be open to say, hey guys, let's kind of dream a little bigger,
Hmm.
right? Right? Lots of things can be hospitals. And I think that comes from a little bit of experience, but also just being open to the possibilities. But I think those were some of the challenges that are, not the normals,
Yeah.
the normal stuff.
Both Emile Hirsch and Tatjana Nardone, sorry if I mispronounced her name, they both had incredible chemistry together in the film and they were fantastic. Was there a moment on set, when you were filming that you knew that these two were perfect for the role, like a favorite moment between the two?
Yeah, I mean, there was a day on set, we were in the house, kind of the house where the
Hmm.
whole thing starts. And we were setting something up, and there's kind of a couch by a window. And I kind of looked over. I think we have a photo of it somewhere. But Tatjana and Emile were sitting down, and she just sort of like leans over and puts her head on his lap. And it was kind of like, a brother sister type of
Hmm.
thing. And it's kind of hard to put into words, but you're like, okay, this is going to work out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Right? There was sort of a chemistry between the two of them that really let you know that they've got each other's backs,
Yeah.
And
That's awesome.
that's sometimes that's hard to find, right? Sometimes you have actors who don't get along, but act like they get along, and you can tell.
Yeah. You could definitely tell in the film. They were great together.
Mhm.
So I think movies are a great way to connect with people and can kind of help bridge the gap. I always love asking this question, but what is one movie that you always recommend to someone, your like go-to film that you use to kind of help people to get to know who you are?
A film that not one of my films, but like a reference film,
Yeah,
right?
like a reference, like something that you use as a connector to, when you first meet somebody, it's like, this is like my favorite thing ever.
I mean, my choices are tend to not be in the norm. I mean, my
Yeah.
favorite film ever is Don't Judge Me, Karate Kid.
It's fine. I
Right?
love
Don't judge.
that movie.
However, right? Because I feel like, being the outsider, going to a new town, trying to fit in, trying to like, be popular with girls,
Yeah.
that sort of coming of age stories is somewhat universal and has surpassed the test of time. However, if I was to pick a couple movies that sort of define my tastes, I would have two in particular, and one would be The Martian, which is an odd choice.
It's a
Most
great
people didn't
film.
really, most people don't enjoy The Martian. I think it is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
Again, it's a guy facing the universe, man against the world by himself, isolated, which I know a lot of sort of aspiring filmmakers feel that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I felt that way. And then the other film, so again, I've watched The Martian many, 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 many times because I think it's such a statement on the triumph of the human spirit and
Yeah.
not giving up, right? So now after we've had the discussion, you're like, oh, Martian, I can see that, right? Um, and then the other film is just Inception. I think Inception is a wonderful example of the potential of what a film can be,
Yeah.
right? I think that sometimes we don't expect enough of our audience, right? Oh, they're not going to understand. Ah, they'll be fine, right? I think the audience are intelligent, are very intelligent nowadays, and they can understand a complicated narrative that tells complicated stories that are rooted in personal relationships. And I just think the way that Nolan did that film, I know it's gotten a lot of controversy on both sides, but I think the point of being a filmmaker is to take a big swing,
Yeah.
right? And there aren't many films that take a bigger swing than that. So those would be my three examples.
Those are great choices. Last thing here. I know the movie comes out tomorrow. Is there anything that you want everyone to know before they go and see it, or just something that you want people to know about the film?
I just think that if you like psychological thrillers, if you like being surprised, if you like trying to figure it out as you go along, with a little bit of action, excitement, and chasing, right? I think you'll enjoy this film, and I think you'll notice the nods to The Matrix and some of the other films that you referenced. So I hope everybody, checks out the film, and it was a pleasure making it. And again, I don't want to focus too much on this, but I'm just an average guy that was able to make a movie. So I think if you try hard enough, you can do it.
Yeah, well, you did fantastic. I absolutely loved it, and I really appreciate you meeting with me today. This has been awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you,
Of
Seth.
course, you're okay.